Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Hope you all are fine and doing good and understood all the previous lectures of physics. Welcome to another virtual class of physics. In today's lecture we have to study about the graphs. This one is the question number 11 from your notes. Students, you have seen the different graphs, as you have seen the graph on your result card, the graph on your result file. You have graph in different places, just like cricket match. You have seen the graph that shows the performance of the cricketers, and on your result card that shows the performance of your studies. Okay, the first question that arises in our mind, that what is graph? So here is the definition of graph, that a pictorial way means the representation in the form of picture. A pictorial way of presenting information about the relation between various quantities. Various quantities means different quantities. For example, as you have seen a graph on your result card or on your result file, there are two quantities. First one is the years, time, and the other one is your percentage. And we have to draw a graph between two quantities, and that graph gives us the information about your progress in your exams. Okay, here is another term that is called variables. Okay, the definition of variables is the quantities between which a graph is plotted. Okay, those quantities on which the graph is plotted, those quantities are called variables. Basically, the word variables derived from the variation. Variation means there is a change. It means those quantities between which the graph is plotted are also called variables, and their values are changed with respect to time. After some time, there are different values for different instants. That's why those quantities are called variables. Okay, students, the variables are of two types. There are two types of variables. The first type is called independent variable or independent quantity, and the other type is called the dependent variable or dependent quantity. Okay, here is the independent variable or independent quantity. So the definition of independent quantity is, a quantity is called independent quantity if its value does not depend upon any other quantity. It means independent quantity have a change in its value, but it does not depend on any other quantity. For example, as you have seen a result card, a graph on your result card, a graph on your result file, there is a horizontal line, there is a mention the sessions. Okay, for example, first bi-monthly, second bi-monthly, midterms, final exams. Those quantities are independent quantity because there is a time that does not depend upon any other quantity. Okay, students, as you have seen a graph, there are two lines, the vertical line and the horizontal line. Okay, the horizontal line called x-axis and the vertical line is called y-axis. So the independent variables are generally graphed on the x-axis. For example, the sessions or the exams, like first bi-monthly, second bi-monthly, always mentioned on x-axis on horizontal line. So independent variables are always plotted on x-axis, graphed on x-axis. Here is another quantity that is called dependent quantity or dependent variable. So the definition of dependent variable or dependent quantity is the quantities whose value varies with independent quantity is called dependent quantity. Varies mean changes. Okay, it means the quantity whose value changes with respect to independent quantities is called dependent quantity. For example, your percentage depends upon your exams. As the time passes, your percentage improves or decreases, increases or decreases. It means that it depends upon your exams. Okay, students, the dependent variables are generally graphed on y-axis. As I have told you that there are two lines in a graph. The horizontal line is called x-axis and the vertical line is called y-axis. So the dependent variables are always mentioned or graphed on y-axis. I am giving you the same example of your result card that as you have seen, the percentage of your exams always mentioned on the vertical line or on the y-axis, that is dependent on your exams. Okay, student, here is the picture of graph representation. As I have told you, there are two lines. The vertical line means the line from up to down or down to up. Okay, and there is a horizontal line from left to right or right to left. The horizontal line is called x-axis and the vertical line is called y-axis, and the dependent variables are always graphed on y-axis and independent variables are graphed on x-axis. Okay, student, here is the graph that is called the displacement time graph. It means there are two quantities between which the graph is plotted. Those quantities are, the first one is displacement and the other one is time. Now we have to draw a graph and we have to decide which quantity is independent quantity and which one is the dependent quantity. Okay, here is a time. Time is always an independent quantity because time does not depends upon any other quantity. So we have to draw the values of time on x-axis and we have to draw the values of displacement on y-axis. So the displacement time graph shows how the displacement of a moving object changes with respect to time. Here is another type of a graph that you will study in detail in your next lectures. That is called the velocity time graph. It means there are two quantities between which the graph is plotted. The first quantity is called the velocity and the other term is called time. So the time is the independent quantity, so we have to draw the values, we have to mention the values of time on x-axis and we have to draw the values of velocity on y-axis because velocity depends on time. So the velocity time graph shows how the velocity of a moving object changes with time and we get the average value of the acceleration because acceleration is change in velocity in unit time. Here is another example of a graph between two quantities and those quantities are height and age of the student. Okay, now first of all we have to decide the which quantity is independent quantity and which quantity is dependent quantity. So look at the age of the student. Age is basically a time. So time is an independent quantity. So we have to draw the values of age on x-axis and we have to draw the values of height on y-axis. So as you can see, in 4 years, the age of 4 years, the height of the student is around about 3 feet. and in 10 years the height of the student is around about 5 feet. So the graph shows how the height of the student changes with age. So we can say that height depends upon the age of the student. So height is a dependent quantity and the age is independent quantity upon which. Okay students, here is a example, or you can say that there is a question for you, that if you are looking at a graph of the motion of a vehicle. Okay, we have to draw a graph for the motion of the vehicle. On the y-axis displacement and on the x-axis is time. Which of the following is the independent variable or independent quantity from those two quantities that are mentioned on a graph, or the graph plotted between the two quantities? So here is the answer of the question, that is time. Time is an independent quantity and the independent quantities are graphed on x-axis, and time does not depend upon any other quantity, although all the other quantities are depends upon time. Here is another example or another question for you, that where is the independent variable most commonly displayed on the graph? There are two axes, x-axis and y-axis. You have to mention where the independent variable most commonly displayed on the graph. Okay students, here is the answer of your question, that the independent quantity is always graphed along the x-axis, and x-axis is the horizontal line on a graph, as I have told you. So the independent quantity is mentioned on x-axis. Here is another question for you, that where is the dependent variable most commonly displayed on a graph? As you have seen a graph, you have to identify that where is the dependent variables or the dependent quantities most commonly displayed on a graph. Here is the answer of your question, that dependent quantity is always graphed on y-axis. Y-axis is the vertical line in a graph. So the dependent quantity is always mentioned on y-axis of a graph. The next question, that is the question number 12 from your notes, that when did the terms distance and displacement are used interchangeably? Interchangeably means we can use distance or displacement. It means both are same. So the question, when did the terms distance and displacement are used interchangeably? So when the motion of an object or the motion of a body is in a straight line, we can use distance and displacement interchangeably. For example, you are observing a car or a vehicle that is moving in a straight line. So there are no U-turns and there are no sharp turns. There is a straight line motion. So we can use distance and displacement. So if the distance and displacement, we can use both the quantities or both the terms interchangeably. Similarly, if the motion is in a straight line, then the speed and velocity are also used interchangeably. As you have studied, there is a differentiation between the speed and velocity. As you have studied, the speed is something else and velocity is something else. The definition of the speed is if the body covers a distance in unit time, that is called speed, and if the body covers a displacement in unit time, that is called velocity. So if the distance and displacement can use interchangeably, similarly the speed and velocity both are also used as interchangeably. So we can say that speed and velocity both are same. Now the question number 13 from your notes, that how distance and time can be related through graph. There are two quantities, distance and time. We have to draw the graph between distance and time. As we know that time is an independent quantity, so time is along horizontal axis, that is called the x-axis. We have to mention the values of time on x-axis, and distance along vertical axis, that is called y-axis. So we have to mention the different values of distance on y-axis. If we get the different values at different time period of the distance of an object, we can easily find out the speed of the object or the speed of a body, that is called the average speed. Okay students, it's time to end the lecture, and here is your diary. Your diary is, you have to learn question number 11, 12 and 13 of unit number 2 from your notes. And today you have assessment of question number 6 to 10 of chapter number 2 kinematics. Since you have to attempt the assessment on loose shades with proper presentation,